One more guest here for this Monday edition of the show. That is the great Joe Everett from NFL Draft Bible. Joe, how's it going today, man?
Going great. A terrific weekend of games. The only downside is I guess we only got 3 more organized football games left. So that's looking forward to those for sure, man.
Yeah, definitely. And, we've got 2 very, very interesting conference championship games that we will hit on here in a couple of minutes. But, Joe, I got to ask. I mean, watching that game unfold last night with the Saints and Vikings, you're sitting there thinking, 38-year-old Drew Brees has another signature moment. I mean, he was just throwing dimes to bring them back in there. That throw to Alvin Kamara was just stupid. And then the one to Willie Snead on 4th and 10, like, he had utmost confidence that they were moving the chains there on 4th and 10 after 3 straight incompletions. I mean, it was just remarkable. You get Minnesota with Kai Forbath just hammering that 53-yarder. Looked like a Dustin Johnson drive on a par 4. He just crushed the thing. Just so many, headline superstar moments. And then how the game ended. With Stephon Diggs going up, making a play. Kudos to Case Keenum for putting the ball out there. But poor Marcus Williams, man. That poor kid.
Oh, I feel terrible for him because I still think he's a player and a lot of people are going to dog him, but even on the play, I look at it as he assumed a little too much, and people know what happens when you make assumptions. But I think he saw out of bounds, clock's going down, I need to contain to the boundary, and he put his head down, which is a cardinal sin. And then number 2, he just went way too. The result just shows like a guy that doesn't know how to tackle, basically. But I think the worst part of it is for the Saints here. We always talk about the wind going out of the sail. Well, someone shot their balloon and the bucket's going down. Like, that was a magical moment. I agree. That wheel route for Kamara was an excellent. What a play calling exhibition in the second half by Sean Payton. That wide receiver end around by Snead. If he doesn't, Snead's a high school quarterback. If he doesn't misthrow that, Kamara's wide open. That would have been a touchdown. So it's just so many near misses, and that's the difference. Who's going on to the next round. I mean, that's kind of, not to be corny, but the games you hoped for, it's all boiling down to that last play, and it was just a miracle there for Minnesota. Good for them, but I do worry about the Saints there. It's just the Breeze getting old. You mentioned the age. How big is this window for them? And he's also in the contract year. I mean, of course they're going to find a way, bring him back. They're too close, but knowing that it's got to be now or never, I think, is also a bit of a monkey on your back too. So they're going to be a good team again next year. I love the way they drafted. They struck gold with Lattimore, but man, knowing how close you could have been, that's going to eat away at a lot of people there in that building.
I mean, it's hard. I give Pete Carmichael a lot of credit, and Sean Payton sort of by extension there as well. I mean, the Snead play was really creative, but I feel like the timing of trying that play was just not ideal. I mean, you look at what's at stake there in that spot. Yeah, it was a creative play call. It was something that very clearly could have worked, and if it does, I mean, you're talking about New Orleans taking a 21-20 lead, but then, Minnesota has a chance to make it a 2-score game there if they go down and score, because they could have made it a 23-14 game at worst. Now, the Saints were fortunate in that they had to punt the football, but, man, that was a really big gamble to take at that stage of the game. And if it works out, you're a genius. And it didn't work out, but they still got the football back, wound up scoring the go-ahead touchdown anyway, got the blocked punt, which, it was obviously, special teams was such a big deal here throughout the week. I mean, you look at that Falcons-Eagles game with both teams having to drive long fields, both punters pinning them inside the 20. Maybe special teams, something we need to focus on a little bit more going forward. But, then Sean Payton, the challenge on the right catch, I think, was the right call. The challenge on Keenum being down or not, I mean, you just blew a timeout for no reason. It didn't come back to hurt them, but it very well could have. I mean, somebody's got to be in that dude's ear saying, no, we're good, keep the timeout. Just so many, there were some strange things overall this weekend. I mean, I don't know what the hell Mike Tomlin and Todd Haley are doing. Ben Roethlisberger just going rogue, checking out of 4th and inches, to throw the football 10 yards downfield. Like, I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if Roethlisberger is trying to get these guys canned or what the case may be, but it's fascinating to watch because all the details mean so much in the playoffs. I just talked about special teams, something we don't focus on too much, but probably should. Sometimes talent overshadows coaching. Sometimes coaching overshadows talent. Sometimes talent doesn't give a shit about coaching. It was all on display this weekend.
I think one saying that definitely applies to both of those cases is live by the sword, die by the sword. And that's Sean Payton. He is a gambler. He'll take those shots. And then definitely Roethlisberger and the freedom they've given him. You kind of have to give it to him, though. I mean, he knows protections. He is on the field. It's you kind of acquiesce to that great pro, but yet Roethlisberger will do that. Even on a fourth, he will take that deep shot, and they did it multiple times in that game. And you have to wonder, really, how many of those situations in the game, heck, I've got it on in the background right now, like that fourth down call, when they called the sweep instead of the draw, is that because Big Ben didn't want to get hit and he checked out of that? How many of these fourth down and third down scenarios it's all on Big Ben is what you really have to wonder here. But, yeah, I think that's, he got you that far. You have to put it in his hands at this point. Otherwise, then he really will retire if you take it out of his hands in these crucial moments that he's worked so hard for. So it's, like I say, they definitely died by the sword today in Pittsburgh. Or yesterday.
All right, well, let's look at one more here, and that's Steve Sarkisian, who we've beaten up on throughout the year, and maybe it's a little bit unfair because he's not Kyle Shanahan, and our listeners out there can go ahead and finish whatever drinks in front of them. He's not that guy. I mean, he's just not that caliber, and it is what it is, and it's not his fault that he's not Kyle Shanahan. There are very few guys that are of Kyle Shanahan's ilk when it comes to play calling, play design, feel for the game. So Atlanta didn't score in the second half of this game. Got stopped on the goal line, which has been their Achilles heel all year long. They don't score touchdowns. They didn't score one when they needed to. They went home. The Eagles move on. What do you do in this situation? I mean, do you go with a third straight season with a different offensive coordinator? Do you try and sit down with Sarkisian and be like, look, man, you got to figure this thing out. We need to do X, Y, and Z here in the red zone. Look back at film of what Kyle Shanahan did, how he got different guys open. I mean, what did the Falcons do? Because this was their problem all year. Their defense was vastly improved from last year. They only gave up 15 points, and they lost because they couldn't get in the red zone or in the end zone when they needed to. So what do they do going forward?
I think Sarkisian has to go. And I don't know that this could be solved in a sit-down, and the real truth of the matter is that the folks in Tuscaloosa, Nick Saban, they should be sending Dan Quinn a Christmas card every year for taking this guy off their hands. I mean, Dan Quinn is a huge help to Tide supporters getting that championship this year, because if he doesn't hire Sarkisian, he's still there on campus. They don't hire Brian Dable, and I think things play out a lot differently. So you maybe the Tide would be calling jet sweeps on second and goal at the 5, or short screens in the most compressed part of the field. I don't get it, especially when the Falcons, they've got one of the best running back tandems in the league, and you can't take anything away from Jim Schwartz, the Philly defense. He called a great game. They're talented, so good for them. Fletcher Cox also abused those guards. I think that was kind of a problem going into the game. You could see panning out, and it definitely did. But the end of that, in the goal line where they've struggled all year, like you said, sure, they threw a shot at Julio, but then they do that inside screen again, and if you're going to run that play, run it on first down. If you're going to do something like that, just call a run and get the clock going, force them to use the timeout, do something, force their hand a little bit. But, yeah, I don't know what the answer is. Throw 4 shots to Julio, but the one, just kind of inside-outside route where Julio got up to the 2-yard line, that's more what I think they should have done, like combo routes. Well, if the 2 go with Julio, throw the guy that didn't get the assistance or coverage. So, there's just some stuff. And then, the last play, I think it's just a sprint right go. So, I know all the listeners saw it. It's just a basic rollout. You're shrinking half the field, and, on a fast defense like that, I don't know that that's the answer there. And it's just there's a lot of things that were happening last year that I guess they're going to happen in San Francisco with our man. But I believe the Falcons just have to change. There's no difference in personnel, I think, that's going to make up for this guy's lack of adjustments and lack of next-level play calling. I mean, they really Dan Quinn's got to put his foot down and be the head coach, and that's kind of what it boils down to. It's either get more involved in offense or find a guy to change the offense.
Julio Jones is 6'3", 220. At least that's what he's listed as, and he'll go into Canton one day. Mohamed Sanu, it says 6'2", 210, but he feels like he's more like 6'5", 240. With the range that he has there over the middle. Austin Hooper, 6'3", 250. And you go 50% in the red zone in the regular season and less than that in the playoffs? How is that possible? Just let Matty Ryan throw the football to his big targets. Let him put it where he needs to put it. You don't have to get cute. You don't have to get creative. And we'll transition into looking at Sunday's games because the Jacksonville Jaguars, for as much of a debacle as Blake Bortles can be, for as ineffective as Leonard Fournette has been throughout the season, especially ever since he was injured in the middle of the year, Jacksonville is 6 for 6 in the red zone in the playoffs this season. They're in the AFC Championship game. They were, I think, second or third in red zone scoring in the regular season. This is not that difficult. If you score when you're supposed to score and you play defense, you win games. The Falcons have no excuse for not being in the NFC Championship game. Jacksonville, again, everyone talks about Bortles, but they've got this thing figured out inside the 20, and that's why they're where they're at.
Oh, in Jacksonville, they're calling great plays. Doug Marrone's doing a great job. I think that's, once again, it boils down to coaching for me. It's not that these are the greatest players. I don't like the makeup of that front line very much as far as those guys on an individual base. Linder, I don't know, Robinson, I was not his biggest fan coming out, but they're all playing well. That trap game they've got is working. They're double teaming. They're just dominating the point of attack, and that's something you have to worry about in this matchup coming up because the Patriots aren't the most physical defense out there. They can be run on, and tackling isn't their forte as far as form at the end. Like that, anybody asks me about Patriots defense, I can't get that Juju Smith-Schuster gain out of my mind and why he wasn't stopped earlier. So it's it's the difference. I think it's preparation, it's technique, and that's where you see it. It's lack thereof for an offense like Atlanta, and they've got, just as you made, there's clearly more talent on that other team. Yet the Jaguars look like the better offense this week, just because they're more organized. They've just got a better game plan, and yeah, if Mohamed Sanu's 210, I am 240.
But I mean, you look at this Jacksonville game, and I mean, think about this. If you had told me, first of all, Jacksonville was making the playoffs, I told you were crazy. But if you would have told me that they would give up 42 points in the divisional round and would advance, I would have you committed. You would be in an insane asylum. You'd be wearing a straitjacket for the rest of your life. And here they are. Because they had the strip six, and they had the intercept or the turnover that forced a short field. But again, they capitalized when they forced those short fields. Now, of course, the question in this game is how many of those do you get against Tommy Brady? Because Tom Brady, obviously just so smart, best quarterback in the NFL. And this is a guy that has a multitude of weapons. And you look at how Pittsburgh moved the football. Le'Veon Bell catching the ball out of the backfield, as usual. Antonio Brown, he's just a freak. But how about Vance McDonald with 10 catches for 112 yards? How does Jacksonville figure out how to match up with Rob Gronkowski when they have multiple running backs and Deion Lewis and James White to worry about? That's the big question here is, Pittsburgh scored 42, made a ton of mistakes with the play calling. Roethlisberger audibled out when he probably shouldn't have, just lean forward, use your height, get the first down. Jacksonville still gave up 42 points. Now, of course, they gave up 3 75-yard touchdown drives in the second half when they had a 2-score lead each time. So maybe this is just a young team trying to learn how to win. But the guys that move the football for Pittsburgh are in the same positions that the guys that move the football for New England are in. And that's very interesting about this game, I think.
yeah, the two weaknesses there. And that you're right. The long and short of it is how they match up against that gorilla wearing 87. Because if just as you said, McDonald could do what he does, and Jack and Smith, those guys are fast. That's lightning speed running backs, but the height, the size, that's just a whole other story, and definitely the premium match. That's where the game's decided. I think Brady's going to get real pressure up front. That's where the classic problems have for Brady. Those Giants Super Bowls, the Giants games for that matter, when they get in that A and B gap, Brady has to side shift, doesn't get his feet set. That's where you can kind of get him off his game. But I think, the Patriots will go pretty fast here too. A little delay runs, misdirection, quick passes. I think a lot of short passes to not just the running backs, but Amendola, Hogan, they're going to get a little involved here. But, this game's going to be won by Gronkowski. If he stays healthy for all four quarters, going to be a tough road to hoe for Jacksonville. And then Deshaun Gibson, if there's another weakness that showed up, I saw, he got beat deep and also I think got hurt in the game. So where he's at with his injury, if Cooks, you get him mismatched on, if you get Hogan mismatched, I think that is a mismatch for Deshaun. So that's where they may win with a real deep shot. And definitely I think just a nice matchup of minds here. McDaniels versus Todd Wash's defense, Patricia against Marone. It should be a decent game to watch. And I don't know, if I look at this total here, I don't know that they're going to get to 46 points. I mean, this is a really good Jaguars defense still. I mean, I know we just saw a big high-scoring game last week, but I don't know, maybe this 46 is a bit of an overreaction because you got to think Belichick's going to make Bortles play left-handed, as they like to say, and just, we're going to shut down your best weapon, 8 or 9 in the box, see if Fournette can beat us, and if he doesn't, the bad Blake's going to show up. So, if the bad Blake shows up, the Patriots control the clock, get the chains moving, I don't know if they make it to 46, man.
Yeah, I think that's honestly the way to look, and I think this total is a little bit higher because you saw that 87-point game there for Jacksonville and Pittsburgh, and also the Patriots game wound up going over the total with that late Corey Davis touchdown. I mean, New England was very much in control of that game, scored 35 points in fairly short order. I mean, they didn't score in the first quarter, and I could talk about Mike Mularkey and the decision he made on 4th and 2 to kick it away around midfield. I mean, they got the ball back, and they got lucky that they did, but you're a 2-touchdown dog on the road. You're going to give it to Tom Brady when you're already down 7. Don't do that. That's not a great call. But, when you look at this game, I mean, this total does look a little bit inflated based on what we've seen so far and based on what we saw, in the high-profile games yesterday with both of them going over the total and then New England going over the total on Saturday. So I think that the total is a little bit high here in this spot. And if that's the case, then you certainly have to consider taking the 9 or 9.5 with Jacksonville. If you're expecting a low-scoring game, what I said about Jacksonville in the red zone has held true and has held to fruition here in the playoffs. But what people probably don't realize about this New England team, the defense was atrocious like the first 5-6 weeks of the season. We all know that. But when all was said and done, New England was, 4th or 5th in red zone defense in terms of keeping the opposition out of the end zone. So they do buckle down when they're in the shadow of their own goalposts. And that probably, that has to do with scheme and also has to do with the fact that the lack of team speed that you've talked about with New England throughout the season doesn't show up as much inside the 20 because everything is all bunched together. So if Jacksonville's going to go out there and move the ball a little bit between the 30s, then settle for field goals, how long can this defense hold Tom Brady down from not getting 7s? So I think this is a really fascinating game. It's far more competitive, I think, than the line would suggest. And like you, I like the chess match between the coordinators. And, of course, with Belichick, he'll have the right game plan here.
Exactly. The Pats and Patricia game planning for this, that's where I see not only a little bit of the advantage, but just I don't think either team is going to want to just go fast here. And, Jaguars, the way they scored last week against Pittsburgh, I don't even think they wanted to score that fast. They'd much preferred to keep the ball out of Ben's hands and the Steelers just on the sidelines on offense. But they just, I think if that same thing happens and they just pop up 14-zip real quick, that might actually be bad for them, as silly as that sounds. Because you want to keep it out of their hands, and that's got to be the Jaguars' game plan going here. Just a lot of easy completions, just what we saw last week, check downs, and just Bortles. I don't know that he does it 2 weeks in a row. Is definitely my takeaway. I thought that was probably his best game of the season last week as far as how he looked, and I just don't think he could put it together for a couple.
Now, one last point I'll make on this game, and I do want to get your thoughts on this. We've already talked about the Jacksonville team's speed, and maybe their linebackers are a little bit short in coverage for what they're going to have to worry about here this week. But New England got a pretty favorable draw in that they saw a Dick LeBeau defense again when they played the Titans. And they've obviously seen Dick LeBeau defenses a lot playing Pittsburgh over the last several years in the playoffs. They haven't seen this Jacksonville defense. I mean, they didn't play during the regular season. Jacksonville's speed is something that's very significant here in this matchup because when you look around the league at a lot of these really good offenses, you'll get Minnesota and Philadelphia in the game that we'll talk about next. You look at what New England does. So many of these things are predicated on quick throws, flat routes to the backs, angle routes to the backs, out routes, cuts, slants, all that type of stuff, creating space for guys to get yards after the catch. Well, that's what New England does. And that's what Jacksonville theoretically should be able to stop because they are so fast on defense. So you kind of wonder, I mean, it's the zone blitz scheme of Dick LeBeau inherently gives you some more space to work, inherently gives Tom Brady the opportunity to find guys that are out there in the open and they can pick up 3 or 4 yards before the guy who's responsible for that zone makes the play. Jacksonville is going to approach this thing differently. So I do wonder, maybe the first half under specifically is something to look at here as New England and Tom Brady try to decipher this defense that they're less familiar with.
No, it's the first half under. That's not a bad look. But I would argue, though, that they've played Seattle. They've game planned for Pete Carroll's defense before. If they played Jacksonville in the playoffs, they've game planned for, well, at least Jacksonville once or twice. They've know Gus Bradley's scheme, so they've got the bare bones of it. But certainly, I don't think any of those defenses they played have the speed of the current version of this Jaguars. That's for sure. Especially at cornerback, that's tough to adjust to. And I think that's where you've got a really good point in the first half because that, like I meant, just that tempo, that kind of dynamic on the perimeter and speed at corner, the Patriots at first, that might take them by surprise and have a tough time just sort of going back. It may take them a series or two before they get it figured out. So, yeah, that kind of got some, I think, a lot of merit to it.
All right, and for our listeners out there, I mean, I don't think this is a game that you need to jump on very quickly. I don't think we're going to see too much significant line movement here. I think ultimately Jacksonville does wind up becoming the sharper side in this game, much like the Jaguars were last week against Pittsburgh, but it may not be to the same degree where we actually started to see, some 6.5s popping at the brick and mortars out there in Vegas. We're certainly not going to go that far down with this number. 7.5, 8, probably where I would expect it to close. And Joe and I have already talked a little bit about the total. Now, keep in mind with the total, we've got 2 cold weather championship games this weekend. So follow along with that forecast. That'll be very important. Right now, though, mostly sunny and 49, the long-term look ahead for Foxborough. So it would be nice to see this game played in good weather and see these two teams decide it for themselves as opposed to letting Mother Nature determine the outcome. But, Joe, what about a side here? Do you like either one of these sides?
If I had to pick a side, which I'll probably go my standard Patriots first half bet. Something tells me they're going to want to go out, and if they really get up on them early, I'd be ashamed of myself. I've had a lot of luck with those Patriots first half sides, and I'd lean that way, but I don't know. I mean, like I said, the total is probably more my speed for this game, and yeah, I guess lean Pats first half. It'll probably 6, 5.5. What do you think it'd be?
Yeah, I'd probably say 6-ish. You're looking at a full game around 9 right now. You kind of put it in that dead zone between 4 and 6, and I don't think it does much. So maybe 6, even money, some kind of thing like that. I think that's certainly a possibility, especially because you look at, like what New England did in the first half last week. You look at what Jacksonville, has to go up against here. And yeah, I would say probably New England in the 6 range in the first half would be about what I would think. But of course, that's also predicated on where the full game spread goes. I mean, if this thing comes down to 7.5, we're probably looking at New England -4, 4.5 in the first half. So you'll have to see where the action goes here with this number throughout the week. All right, let's go to the NFC Championship game. Minnesota takes on Philadelphia. The Eagles, once again, a home dog this week, up from the 2.5 or 3 last week to 3.5 this week. But it looks like Philadelphia kind of the preferred side here early in the week, -120, -115, the juice pretty much across the board here. Joe, there are some interesting things about this game. I mean, both home teams this week have the extra day of preparation, or the extra day, I should say, to recuperate more so than anything. Of course, both of them coming off of buys in the first week as well. Minnesota coming off of a first-week bye in the playoffs. So, they're not necessarily all that gassed. But initial thoughts here on this line, and with it being, 3.5 as opposed to 3.
Well, I think they don't I don't know, 3 plus 3.5 with the field goal. It's almost like they really want to get a little Eagles action, maybe. I don't know. I look at this, it's tough, man. I love the total where it is, because I would lean under, and then I see a 38 and backtrack, and not so fast. The Kendricks Bowl. I mean, they've got a Kendricks on both sides of the defense here. The way to beat the Eagles is at corner, but you have to have time to get it out there. I mean, Darby, Mills, I think these guys could be beat by Minnesota's little super tandem there. But it's just Fletcher Cox, watching him last week. Those Falcons guards, they had problems. So I think Easton, Berger, those guys that guard for the Vikings going to have their work cut out for them. It's getting the protections right is going to be how this game's decided there on that side. I think Keenum and the crowd noise, if they have a misstep, if it's not Fletcher Cox, it's Jernigan or Graham or Curry. They've just got so many guys. And, we talk about these head coaching candidates. Philly's got one of their own in Shorts. And, I guess on the other side, the problem I find is Philly's going to want to pound the rock, get their run game going, kind of repeat of last week. But the front 7 of the Vikings, I mean, that's just a little too much talent up there, I think, for the Eagles to hammer it. Ajayi may have looked good against the Falcons, but just Minnesota's a different animal, and I don't know about Nick Foles winning this game, making throws that were wobblers last week. It was just hard to watch some of those throws, and getting away with it with pass interference or right off Keanu's kneel. Don't get me started about that. I think the real problem again for the Eagles is that last week their best weapon, Zach Ertz, was held in check, and he's up against a couple more studs at linebacker. Sure, Falcons linebacker's good, but like the UCLA connection with Barr and Kendricks, I think they take Ertz out of this game. And if Nick Foles makes the same amount of mistakes, those safeties will be back there. Xavier Rhodes, if he's healthy enough to get back in this too, is another aspect to think about. But still, I see a low-scoring kind of slobber knocker here, and really it's just kind of strength on strength. These are just two of the best defenses out there doing it, and that's if you like low-scoring defensive games, this is going to be the one to watch. And another element, just like you said, weather factoring in. I don't know. I guess it's warming up this weekend and everything, but still, I assume it's got to be a little bit bitter in that Eagles Stadium, and that crowd support. That's going to be a tough environment for these Vikings to play in.
Well, look ahead forecast right now, sunny and 53 in Philadelphia. So we may actually wind up with some pretty good weather here. Obviously, it won't be sunny with the 6:40 kickoff. The sun will have already set. But, it doesn't seem like precipitation or temperatures could be that big of a factor. But again, wind forecasts aren't out this early. So, wind is the biggest factor when you talk about totals. So, again, keep an eye out there for the weather updates. To me, this is the hardest game to handicap of the playoffs to date, because I just don't see a high variance outcome in this game. I don't see a blowout either way. I see this game probably holding close to, a field goal either way. I mean, maybe Philadelphia does win this game. Maybe Minnesota wins this game by about what the spread is. But for me, it's really difficult because I have these two guys from the Andy Reid coaching tree, and Pat Shurmur and Doug Peterson. And it's kind of like that Spider-Man meme that goes around Twitter, where these two teams are very, very similar, extremely similar. The difference is Minnesota's got better talent at corners, and that's why, Mike Zimmer's defense is the best unit on the field in this game. But the game plan is the same for both of these offenses. Backs in pass pro a little bit, or they go out in the flat or run those angle routes, trying to throw guys open on quick throws. You got a little bit more of an RPO type thing with Philadelphia, with Nick Foles being a little bit more mobile than Case Keenum. But, I just don't see this game getting out of hand. I don't see a lot of big plays here because Philadelphia, you mentioned it with Fletcher Cox already, so good there that Philadelphia gets pressure with the base front four. So if Minnesota wants to throw Thielen and Diggs open, there's 7 guys back there waiting to tackle them. And then you rely on Case Keenum to make a really accurate throw. So I think this is a tough spot to really take either one of these teams because I think there's so many similarities. There's so many unknowns about the quarterbacks. I mean, Case Keenum made some throws in the fourth quarter. That throw to Wright was a perfect one, dropping it in the basket. Good throw to Diggs on the game winner. But he also had some throws that were just outright disasters in that second half. So you don't know what you're going to get from him. You mentioned Foles. Statistically, the line looked okay, but not a whole lot of zip on those throws. They're not going to move the ball in chunks. I think this is a low-scoring, really hard-nosed, very physical football game. The one thing that I will say here, my lean right now is Philadelphia, and the reason is because Andrew Sendejo, with that concussion for Minnesota, looked like he got knocked out completely. I think it's very doubtful he plays this week, and that's when the game changed for New Orleans, was when they started getting some more throwing lanes, some more opportunities because Sendejo wasn't out there. Maybe that helps Philadelphia. Maybe Minnesota has time to adjust this week, but not having him would be a really tough blow for Minnesota. I think they would still win the game, but I would be more inclined to take Philadelphia against the spread. If Sendejo was able to go, I think I'd look more toward the Minnesota side just because, I think then that makes their defense a little bit more explosive, and I do like, what they're able to do with Thielen and Diggs offensively.
Yeah, and Anthony Harris is not Sendejo. He's a solid little player, but I think it was evident if anybody saw that interception Sendejo made at the beginning of the game. That's just a rare athletic play. And what's funny is, he's, I don't know, if you had to rank all the players in their defense, he just sneaks in the top 10. That's how good the Vikings are on D. So I think, I'm leaning Vikings, but one thing I worry about is just what you hit on is Keenum. Some of those throws, if there's a mistake in this game, as close as I expect this to be, that will decide it. And if those 2 throwaways, one worked out, one should have just been, well, when one was picked, it just, the decision making, it's like he's got 5% Jay Cutler in him or something. Where I don't know where those throwaways came in. One, it was bailed out. It just ended up in Thielen's hands. I honestly believe Keenum was trying to throw it away to the sidelines, away from coverage. But, if he decides to go that way again, Philly will make him pay. That's definitely one of those opportunistic defenses, and, they're no slouch at pass rush. So, hopefully they kind of, Shermer gets into Keenum and said, no more of those Brett Favre rocket throwaways just because you think you've got the arm strength. How about right to the chains, real sharp and snappy? So I think that I'd worry about that if I had the Minnesota side. But, I agree with you. It's a tough game to handicap. I think the total's right on, and geez, if the number's not right about there, if you told me it ended 2017, 2016, I could see it happening. And, it's what you say, it's just not a lot of or variance going on or just enough to bet on. I don't see I think the books kind of got it right.
Yeah, this is a real tough game. And like you said, it probably does come down to whether Foles or Keenum has that back-breaking interception or gets stripped on the backside from pressure or something like that. That may be the deciding factor. And I certainly don't want to have money involved in a game where it could come down to, legitimately one play like that. The Keenum thing is fascinating. I mean, I'm watching that game on that final drive, and he's got that back foot floater that miraculously gets caught. And then he had another one right before the Diggs play that nearly got picked. And I'm thinking, dude, put that damn thing in the third row. What are you doing? And, of course, it all happens to work out. He comes out smelling like roses from the whole thing. But, man, what a remarkable game. And that is one thing I will say about Nick Foles. I mean, Nick Foles flirted with disaster. Disaster didn't come for him. if he takes care of the football this week, and it's harder to do against this Minnesota defense than against the Falcons, because the base Falcons defense was really good. They didn't ball hawk. They had very few turnovers during the regular season. Minnesota can force those turnovers, and that's why, again, I just think this is such a low variance game where you probably get one play that does decide it, and maybe whichever kicker can bury a 50-yarder at the horn wins the game. So I think, again, the under is probably the way to look. And I don't even know if there's going to be that many live betting opportunities. We talk about looking for opportunities to hit the in-game market. I don't know how many of those you're going to get either. I mean, I know there'll be big play swings, momentum swings, if you want to call them that. But I don't know. This game just seems so, it seems like it's going to be played largely between the 25 and the 40 in your own zone. And you're going to have a lot of punts. I don't know if there'll be a punt prop. Probably not, but I would probably bet the over on that one. And then again, we could get outright chaos, and we're all expecting this to be what we thought Jacksonville-Pittsburgh would become. And then that game had 87 points. So, who knows? But I will say this. I mean, underdogs now, depending on the number you got for New Orleans in that game, with the closer being mostly 5.5 out there, underdogs are 7-1 in the playoffs thus far. So, we'll see how this one plays out. But, Joe, one more thing that we want to mention here as we wrap things up for this week. Want to touch on, I guess we'll save Chicago for next week here, even though I'm very intrigued by the Matt Nagy hire, and then also the Mark Helfrich hire as well. We'll save that for next week because the Mike Mularkey thing dropped here this morning, and we might as well hit on that. Despite what the reports were over the last couple of days with the Titans nearing an extension with him, I think you and I had this one pegged perfectly.
They were waiting to get rid of this guy, and now the real battle for Josh McDaniels has begun. I think the Titans right now, they're not just throwing their hat in the ring. They have to be the front runners, and if you're the Indianapolis Colts and you had designs on Josh McDaniels, think again, because I think that you now have to look at the team surrounding the quarterback you're about to take on, and Tennessee has a superior roster, and the long and short of it is the Titans general manager, John Robinson, and his background in New England. I think they were there for the same 6-year span, maybe 6 or 7 before Josh left for Denver. But yeah, I look at this, it's a formality. It's the real question is, does Josh think Mariota can digest his offense, fit that scheme and his vision? I would have to think that a young head coach that drafted Tim Tebow and looked at him as a real prospect would think very highly of a Mariota. Mariota strikes me as much more intellectual, much more dynamic, more athletic, maybe not the same strength, short yardage, but this guy can really do some things that Josh would have to worry. And then also the Colts, I think what puts them behind the 8 ball now, especially with McDaniels, is he's a guy that wants more control. He wants more influence on the personnel decisions. Well, he'll have that with his comrade Robinson more so than Chris Ballard, I'd have to think. I mean, I'm sure they're trying to talk it up, but yeah, this is just hand, meat, glove, and what this does is line up a lot of dominoes right now. I think McDaniels, Tennessee, and now we've got Patricia looking like all but Detroit. Pat Shurmur, I think it has to have the Giants job locked up, and the only reason it doesn't is because we had a miracle last night. Otherwise, there'd be a news announcement in New York, and then really the Colts and the Cardinals now are kind of at the back of the line, scramble mode. I think the Colts go with Mike Vrabel. That'd be my prediction. And the Cardinals, I don't know, Munchak, Steve Wilkes, the defensive coordinator for the Panthers, Chris Richard, the defensive coordinator for Seattle. They've got to do some more research now. I think, like I said, Colts, Cardinals, this puts them in a little bit of scramble mode and sets the Titans up. This could be a really great fit for Mariota's skill set, and the best thing probably for the Titans is just ditching that old moniker, the exotic smash mouth. We're now Patriots in Nashville.
Well, and that's why we can save the Bears for next week, because A, I don't really care about the Pro Bowl, and B, there's only so much we can talk about with the Super Bowl for 2 straight weeks. We'll hit prop bets and all that, but there's so much NFL coaching turnover this year. It's a crazy amount of turnover, and that doesn't just have, a domino effect once the games start. It has a domino effect with what these teams do in the draft, what these teams do in free agency. So we'll kind of set the stage a little bit for the 2018 season with some of those teams next week. And, of course, we'll see what happens if the Cardinals get aggressive and make a move, if, some other things get announced. And we'll have some of that information to talk about with Joe next week on the show. But Joe Everett from NFL Draft Bible, what's up at the Bible right now, man?
Well, it's a big week. The boss man, Rick Saratella, is out in L.A. for the NFLPA game. Our small school guru, Christian Shanafelt's down at St. Pete this week for the Shrine game. So look for those live updates for those events. And then next week I'll be down in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. So I think next Monday I'll probably be going in the road somewhere between Birmingham and Montgomery on I-65. But I'll definitely be ready and be watching those conference games. So, always ready to talk some ball, and definitely keep it dialed into our site. It is All-Star Month, and it's hot and heavy.
Well, and you can follow Joe on Twitter at Joe W. Everett, and then the Bible is at NFL Draft Bible. Joe, thank you so much for your time, buddy. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right, looking forward to it.